We've made it.
Yeah.
We're here, sitting
Beautiful.
back at the farm. Michael Kennard.
Dave Erasmus.
Thank you so much for coming down today.
No, it's a pleasure.
It's been a long time coming, hasn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm so aware that you were setting up the place from a while back, and I've kind of followed from afar. And obviously, Jack's been involved, he's a mutual friend, and so I've been very aware of everything going on. Mm-hmm. So I've felt the pull, because I'm not really that far away.
No.
So I've just been so busy. But I'm less busy as of this week.
Yes, you've got someone working with you now.
Yeah, hence one of the first things I've done is arrived here at the farm.
Well, it's my turn to say that it's an honour now, so thank you. And it's been a very beautiful thing to watch your journey as you've grown into what you're doing, which we'll come on to in a bit. But as is custom on this podcast Listening With, I like to try and start things in a slightly different place instead of just the usual bio that's on LinkedIn or Instagram or whatever it might be. So we've got these cards.
Okay.
And I would love for you to pick 3 different cards.
Yeah.
There's some ones with numbers on them, and there's some ones with like colours and shapes.
Okay.
And you can pick how many colours and shapes and how many numbers you want. And then just put them down and have a look, and we'll sit quietly. And I guess what I'm looking for is a little moment that somehow that those little shapes and numbers remind you of in your past. And we might explore that for a minute before we crack on to all the good stuff that's to come.
Cool.
Is that all right?
I like a little curveball. Let's do it.
And you can deal with them however you like. You can look at them all if you want. You could pick them randomly.
I like
really
the
don't
idea
mind.
of a random selection.
Okay. So here we've got some number ones, and we've got some shapy, colory ones.
Okay. Feels very countdown.
Yeah, it is. It is very Carol Vorderman, isn't it?
Countdown come tarot.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go. 2 of those. 1 of those.
So you've gone for 2 shape cards, 2 inspiration cards, and 1 number card. So
nice.
flip them over.
Oh, so I don't read the word. It's the image.
It's the image on the other
Okay.
side.
Oh, well, that's really interesting.
Okay.
I mean, I could start to elaborate straight away. Like,
Oh,
I mean,
please do.
it says inspiration, and obviously inspiration is that's an easy one. But what I was thinking predominantly, spelt differently, but that's a picture of the sun, and kind of the maybe catalyst might be the right word. For me, kind of taking a bit of a left turn in my life and doing what I do now was because I was about to have a little son born. Didn't know he was a son. I was just a being. So that's very interesting. Cross.
That cross just keeps coming up.
Yeah. It's a sign. I mean, I'm not particularly religious. Very kind of, I mean, what is the difference? But I'm quite kind of spiritual. But it's not, you could say it's quite religious, but not any sort of formal religion as such. I used to go to Boys Brigade as a kid, so I was in the church quite often.
Oh, is that like a Sunday school scouts type Christian thing?
It was, so we went on a weekday after, like evening. I think it was just once a week. It's basically like a kind of boys' social club. There was one for girls as well. They separated us back then. I don't know if they've changed that or if it's even still going. We had like a little Thunderbirds hat.
Oh, nice.
And you had like this, I think, no, we did, it wasn't like scouts. We didn't have the sash thing. We had an armband and you get badges. For, like, it's where I learnt to read a bus timetable.
Wow.
I mean, it's all digital now, but.
So it's not scouts like make a fire. It's more how to get on in.
It was very practical.
Yeah,
it was very practical. We played a lot of dodgeball.
Okay. Yeah.
But there was like ritual around it. So at the beginning, we'd all stand like 3 sides of a square, and then there'd be the guys that were sort of leading it, and you would all like there was a bit of marching, there was a bit of stand to attention, but around we'd sing like a hymn. It was centered around religion.
It's an interesting mix of like army.
I've never really reflected on this as an adult. Yeah.
I've heard of it, but I've never heard anyone describe it before.
I mean, I basically started going because I had 2 older cousins that went.
Let's see.
And so older cousins, you're kind of like a bit in awe. You look up to them. They go, I'll go. I didn't, and it was expected you'd go to church every Sunday, and I went occasionally. I remember sometimes they'd come around to our house and say, Michael's not been to church much. I quite enjoyed it. I enjoyed like the smell of the frankincense. I kind of enjoyed the whole ritual, like going up and some people got a bit of bread. Some people, I just get patted on the head. And the wine would just go past me every time. I wouldn't have liked it. I don't even really like it now. But it was interesting. But I always I never really kind of internalized any of it. It was entertaining and it was very interesting, but I never like became one with the church.
Yeah, it was a community thing, a learning thing, a cousin thing.
Yeah. And the whole thing was just a lot of fun, basically.
Yeah.
We had like trips away. I remember like I found out that I kind of moved around in my sleep there because we were 2 rows of us either side of this hall in Swanage, I think.
Right.
And I woke up. I fell asleep on a like an airbed thing, inflatable bed on one side of the room, and I woke up on the other side of the room, still in my sleeping bag, but next to somebody. I remember them us waking up together and just being like, we were both kind of like, what are you doing here? And then everybody found that very funny. It happened 2 nights in a row, and then obviously got into my more conscious mind, and it stopped.
Yeah.
Don't know whether that happened at home as well. I don't know. Might have just been in new surroundings.
Yeah, social environments. You figure new things out. I guess that's all part of the growing process, isn't it?
And I was young, so I probably hadn't been away from home like that.
Yeah.
Certainly not in that setting away from parents. So it's probably just very weird. My brain was probably processing in all sorts of ways, and I was rolling around in my sleep. Who knows?
I used to do that, actually. I used to wake up at the opposite end of the bed and be entirely confused.
Wow.
Now, I want to ask you more about your son and that moment you described.
Yes.
But before we do, let's turn the last card.
Well, it says time, and it's the number 12. I don't know if there's anything really significant about 12. I mean, age 11 to 12 was quite a significant. There was a lot of change in my life at that time. My parents separated in between junior school and high school. I went to a high school where I don't think any of my friends went there, but a girl that I was very fond of went there. I selected my high school on that basis.
That's a big bet.
That's a big bet.
How did that go?
We weren't in any of the same classes. Don't know where she is now. It was great. I loved school, actually, high school. But
really?
Yeah.
As good a reason as any to choose which high school to go to. Let's be honest, it's all pretty arbitrary when you're 11.
I mean, I've obviously felt no greater pull anywhere else.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I put the school where a lot of my other friends went. In fact, my best friend at the time, that was my second choice school. So I must have really liked this girl.
Yeah,
I don't really
exactly.
remember it. I was 11 or 12.
Yeah.
But yeah, my parents separated then. We had to move house just down the road, but big change.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of change around then.
How old were you when you were going to the boys' brigade?
Oh, younger than that.
Yeah.
I don't even know. Maybe from around 8 to about... Maybe until around then. Maybe until I got aware of, like, you got to be cool.
All right, yeah.
And it was not cool. In fact, I remember
Really?
meeting some of the lads outside of... Just like out and about, like in a park. And we'd sort of, oh, hi, how you doing? And then someone would say, how do you know each other? And we go, oh, we used to go to this thing. Like, so make sure you don't say where we went. It was the kind of thing that, you could get a bit of a... I mean, this is a cross, but you could get a target on you for having been a boys' brigade person back then.
I get
so
you.
It was like, it was first rule of boys' brigade is you didn't talk about boys' brigade. Yeah.
Well, then, so boys' brigade, 8 to 12, big change at 12, and then obviously your son,
Yeah.
and you mentioned that it was a big sort of change around that time. So take us into that change moment. Do you remember? Was there a clangor moment, or was it just a period of transition? Was there something that...
It was a bit of a period of transition. So I was living in I converted a Luton van, and me and my now wife, Bella, were living in that for almost 3 years, or just under 3 years, I think. And we were very kind of, I mean, obviously just like kind of free. It was great. Initially, the argument was, we'll be able to save up and get a deposit and buy a house or some land or something. But what manifested was we could take a bit of a back seat in life and enjoy ourselves and be a bit free. And we did. It was great. It was great. We travelled around a bit, but mostly stayed in and around the city in Brighton and just kind of, just enjoyed life a bit. She's a bit younger than me. She keeps me young. We had kind of quite strong ideas around things. And I can remember we thought that we weren't going to be people that had children together. And I think a mixture of things that maybe I think we were thinking like there's a lot of people already. And, the kind of the climate anxiety and, all these kinds of issues all wrapped up made us think, is this a place we want to bring a new person? And we'd go to things, obviously we were together a lot, and we'd go to things as couples, and people would say, often older people would say, like our friends' mums or whatever, would kind of say to us, but we need people like you guys who are like switched on to these things to have children because, other people are. Yeah. And it was this one woman, I don't even remember who she was or where we were, but it was what she said that resonated. She said something like, where's the next generation of positive impact people? That was the term she used. Right. Where are they coming from? And we were just like, people had said that sort of thing to us before, and we just like pleasantly sort of say, yeah, good point, yeah. Carried on with the party, and it was like, I'm sure it was a few weeks later, I think we were sat down very much like this, just eating breakfast quietly. And I think I turned to her and said, so, positive impact people, positive impact person. She sort of said, have you been thinking about that as well? I said, I can't stop thinking about that. And we sort of talked about it increasingly more and more, and thought maybe we should. Maybe actually there's an onus that we should do that very intentionally. And started looking at, how essentially I wanted to know, how could you best raise a positive impact person? So I went on this deep dive into like child psychology and like brain development. Listened to lots of podcasts, very interesting people, and essentially to kind of delineate all of that into something concise, it was, you can kind of tell children all you want. You can say you should be like this, you should talk like this, know this. But particularly in their early years, up to 3 and then potentially even up to 7, they're really learning by the way that their tribe of influence acts in the world. What do you do? What do you say? What are you exemplifying? That's how you're gonna, that's how you really teach. It's not what you say in the world, it's what you do. And I thought, wow. And this being was on the way. Forming in Bella. And I was like, wow, I'm a hypocrite. I'm going to be saying you've got to have a positive impact on the world. And I work in a very destructive industry, a very wasteful industry, with so much gets thrown away, so much isn't actually sustainable. What am I going to do? This is happening, and these are my beliefs, and hypocrisy isn't something I can
jam with very easily.
It's not my vibe.
No,
I can't be it. So I started phasing out. I dropped Wednesdays for my trade work.
But wait, like, did you phase out without anything to move towards? Like, what were you moving towards?
That was my next thing. So I was phasing out into setting up a little market garden. Very small little patch, really degraded, but I welcomed that. And so the whole thought process was, I'm gonna demonstrate like kind of bioremediation. I'm gonna produce an abundance, but be building soil. This whole thing doesn't have to be extractive, and so that was it. That was like, I'm a regenerative market garden. That was what I called it. Not publicly yet, in my head. And I went about setting that up. Very quickly, we hit March 2020.
Yes, COVID,
crash. Right. Though what it meant was I could be on the market garden 24/7.
I see.
Because it was in the middle of this guy's land, but it was like I could just wander in. I didn't have to. I'm isolating still. I'm just by myself. And I thought, well, I can make this work, and then I'm allowed to do it too. So I started doing veg boxes for like neighbors, and it was great. But very quickly felt like the impact of it, I didn't feel satiated. I felt like it was contained. I couldn't get more space. There was a limit to the impact I could have. And also in setting that up, I tried various types of compost because I thought, well, I'm going to do no dig and I'm going to be getting organic matter in here. They had loads of manure there from horses and stuff, and I thought, well, I can use some of that, but let's really get this going. I tried various types of compost. There was a green waste, there was a manure based, there was a spent mushroom. They kind of got better on that in that order, but just intuitively at this point, because I was no soil scientist or anything, I just remember thinking, where is the life in this stuff? It felt inert, particularly the green waste stuff. It actually was black and it smelt like oil. It was horrible. And so I thought, like, how am I gonna regenerate the soil with this stuff? And so soil just became very much my thing. And being as I've already described, this deep dive kind of type, I did that and started studying the soil food web with a friend, and he'd bought this course, and it was a series of like mind-blowing, paradigm-shifting learning. It was really exciting. And I'd always been a grower. I mean, one of my earliest memories was sowing a sunflower seed with my granddad, and he was not, I mean, as I say, it's an early memory. It's almost, it's almost a little bit vague, a little bit blurry, a little bit fuzzy, but that almost feels even nicer. Like he was compared to me now, he passed away a few years back. He was a big guy, big hands, big, deep smoke roll up. So he had a very distinct smell, very distinct sound. And he wasn't like, he wasn't too tactile. I didn't pick you up and hug you. He wasn't one of those guys, but I remember him holding my hand, sowing this seed, and that, like, feeling held by this like wise elder. It was a beautiful moment, and sowing this seed together, and that just feeling like it was something that obviously stuck with me. I recall it now, and every time we went back every week or so, being a sunflower, it was like, and being I'm a small person now, but being a very small person, this thing was like, it was like, wow,
Jack and the Beanstalk.
And the best that it culminated at the end of that season with us, he laid out newspaper, got the head of this sunflower, and gave me a stick to beat it or just bang it on the floor, and the sunflower seeds scattering, and little boy in his element, sunflowers everywhere, and he just stop. Say, what, have I done something wrong? Like, normally if I've got a stick and I'm bashing something, I've done something wrong. No, look at this. And I remember him picking up a seed and putting it back into my hand, and I'm looking at this seed, and he said, from that one sunflower, my hairs stand up every time I tell this, from that one sunflower seed that we sowed together, we now have like hundreds. And he just said, like, isn't that magic? Just ask me the question, isn't that magic? And it's just like, now, like, that's the world's magic. That's the world's gift for me. So that's always been there in me. I've always had a growing space, whether it was a balcony in a flat I was living in, or generally try and find somewhere with a garden. As soon as we settled back in Brighton, the first thing we did was find a way of getting access to an allotment. Took a few years, but we got one. So growing was always there. So as somebody who grew, what blew my mind is the fact that I didn't know what soil was. You know, you have that, like, I call it like the triangle of doom, like sand, silt and clay. It's like these are aggregates, but one of the kind of things I learned, it was a really cool quote that said, you know, soil without biology is simply geology.
Right.
It's just those aggregates, right? But soil is everything. I mean, I think of it very much now as the everythingness, you know, and ultimately, so that was, I guess, finding that there was another quote that caused the change. So I'm doing this market garden. I'd come to the realization that if I want good compost, I've got to make it. What is abundant? Food waste in an urban environment is everywhere.
But let's check back to, because we'll get into the detail a little bit later and try and meld this concept of listening to this sort of burrowing kind of a deep dive, let's say. Like, I want to try and see if we can find the common ground between deep dives and, which is often science, research, knowledge, and this idea of listening, and see if there's some common ground. But back to your son, you were not happy as an electrician. There was that hypocrisy there for you. you're then in the garden, you're getting closer, but you're not satisfied.
It's still not there, yeah.
And then where are you at now? Do you feel, you got a 4-year-old and 2-year-old?
Now, yes, yeah.
So when you look at them, if
almost 5 and 3.
Really, wow,
yeah.
Exciting, and that's very important.
Yeah.
4 3/4.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How do you feel now? You're obviously, we'll get into the detail the deep dive you've been on in amazing ways, but just before we get through,
now I feel particularly this week. I kind of feel very light, very present, kind of always. Like I just kind of flow. Like I don't chase anything. I don't force anything. I go with what, not in a too laid back kind of way and just like a path of least resistance. I just kind of put it out there and I trust my intuition massively now. And so I just kind of follow with what feels right. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at, really.
And which is awesome. And how do you relate that to that idea of wanting to create positive impact human and aligning your behavior to be with that? Do you feel, so it sounds like if you're in a bit of a state of flow, there probably is a sense of peace and contentment with what you're doing, because otherwise maybe there would be more of a fight to try to change the tracks you're on a bit.
Yeah.
Sounds like you feel like where you are and where you're moving towards gently is you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess ultimately what kind of happened in that kind of, you say that sort of fight, that internal kind of, this doesn't feel like it's there, I'm not there. I took, as you say, like I basically took a couple of days out from anything, and I sat and I kind of meditated and I read and I listened to podcasts. I always do that. I'm always listening. Just I want to kind of tune in to if I'm not feeling it yet, it's got to be out there somewhere. And yeah, like I was listening to a lot of Alan Watts. I was reading a lot of Krishnamurti, that kind of stuff, and I kind of just by accident online stumbled across it's like a social media like meme, and it said, and I always forget the name of the guy, so I always fail to attribute it correctly, but ultimately it said, despite all of our achievements and advances, we still owe our existence to the fact there are 6 inches of topsoil and the fact that it rains. And I just remember just looking at that and just thinking, yeah. And I'd for years, one of my things has always been saying, yeah, but just zoom out. We're always so siloed and we're looking at a thing, but everything impacts something else and has an impact, and I'm always saying we've got to zoom out. That's what we kind of just all need to do. So it felt like in reading that, I just kind of, I was zooming out intellectually in my head, almost trying to find something wrong with that statement, basically, and just being like, wow, well, I can't do much about the weather, but I could do something about soil, I think, or at least it's worth exploring if that's what we owe our existence to. And that's what I've basically done ever since.
It's interesting, the zooming out thing, because there's zooming out and there's zooming in, and then there's the normal point of view, whatever natural point of view one has. And also I often think about on the phone, there's filming stuff in normal time, and then there's filming it in hyperlapse or time lapse, and then filming it in slow-mo. And I often love doing the fast or the slow. I don't really mind, but I feel like it draws my attention to something of a process that I would miss at normal speed, and I think I too can live in a realm where it's all zoomed out, but after a while, or in slow-mo, let's say, or in hyperlapse, either, however you see it, but after a while I find it more valuable to be able to switch between the two. And then sometimes best of life is lived in real time, in normal time, because that's often where the relationships are. But I think in terms of impact, often it is about being able to zoom out or hyperlapse, or look on different time frames, or zoom in or slow down, to be able to see something that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Yeah, well, I love that you say that, because ultimately zooming out in my head has led me to be spending a lot of time looking down a microscope and zooming into microscopic things. So I do a lot of zooming out and zooming in. Soil, I learn a lot from the kids. I love the kind of the idea of like the wisdom of youth. You kind of ask them more than I tell them, really. But the soil has kind of taught me a lot. This is kind of this fractal, like the more I look in and zoom in to the soil, the more I kind of basically have learned that ultimately the more diverse and abundant on the micro level things are, the more resilient they are, the more abundant they can express and produce further abundance upward, and then that leads to more abundance, more diverse foods that can grow in that thing. And then, you know, what I don't know if it's a coincidence, the places that I've been to that are doing that really well, even in kind of man-managed landscapes, the team that forms around that come from all over the place, and you get much more diverse social structure as us as humans, and therefore resilience comes because somebody can wire up the lights, and somebody can harvest and grow the veg, and somebody can cook the food really well, and somebody will be really good at nurturing the children. And you know, for me it's like I keep now seeing on the micro and the macro the same kinds of patterns, and I guess I can kind of get a bit woo with it all, but I kind of see that existence is just one suchness, the everythingness, and it's just energy moving from one thing to another thing. That's all that goes on, and we kind of have a say in how we pass on and move on energy, whether it's quantifiable and something we physically do, or whether it's energetically in conversation. You know, often people say things to me when I start talking about my work. I get quite excited, and people say I'm like charged up. You're like, someone said to me one time, not that long after COVID, you're kind of infectious, but in a good way. And so I almost feel like it's intentional now because that came into my awareness. I feel like I could be all like downbeat, and I think I did used to live under this cloud of climate anxiety, and through learning about permaculture and then the very possibility of regeneration in many different aspects, it's like that kind of dissipated. And now I just I realize that if we live well and intentionally, our impact, we think of our footprint as a negative usually, but if you live well, your footprint is your legacy, because you can be making this place, we can make this place better. You know, that's my kind of, that's what I want to exemplify. I want to be making this place better as my work. And therefore that's what I spend most of my time doing.
And that's amazing, and we'll get into that. There's just one thing for my benefit I want to circle back to, because something you said about when you're young, when someone's young and it's their circle of influences in their tribe. And you're describing about, yes, it's not about words, but about behavior and absorbing that. But I think, without getting too deep into sort of developmental psychology, obviously our sort of rational mind kind of develops as we grow older. And I don't know if I'll be able to articulate this very well, but so one of the things I've been thinking about is that different senses, vision, smell, listening, almost represent paradigms of knowing, ways of knowing that go beyond the sense themselves. And so hopefully you'll see where I'm getting to. That it seems to me that as a child, because the way listening goes in, obviously it's 360, it's just you're absorbing it. And I think almost as a child, because you haven't yet gone through that developmental phase of really getting that sort of rational, task orientated, like you live in the land of imagination and play ideally, even sight I think comes in almost as listening. You know, I think all your senses are sort of absorbed in that slightly less forebrain, like conscious way, and it's kind of just you haven't got your boundaries and your walls and your filters yet. And so I'm just noticing that possibly, even though you might be watching the behavior of the adults around you, in a sense it's a bit closer to listening. Everything's a bit closer to listening possibly when you're little, and as you get older we get far more dominated by this vision sense, which is all about action orientated or goal orientated, and you've got all that rationality and filtering and processing. And I think touching then back to what you said about, you know, asking the questions and learning from the kids and the wisdom of kids, I think there is something natural, and it's nothing new to say that there's sort of in that playfulness, in that imagination, there is a beauty there that we sort of struggle to get back to. And I guess maybe this ramble is to say that's a risky thing, because kids can't filter for themselves. That's why you have to surround them with the right sensory inputs of all kinds. But also there's something for us possibly to learn from kids about how to get back to sort of everything as listening, everything as just absorbing it and being porous rather than being closed and fixed and rigid and decided on where we're going.
Yeah, I absolutely love that you said that, because obviously being aware that this is about listening. On my way here today, I was thinking, is that limited to just sound, so that's, basically having those thoughts on my way here today. So that's really interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's that I think there's a thought there that hopefully somebody will be able to come and do a deep dive with me on at another time about, well, probably a developmental psychologist who might be able to expand a bit further on some of the things that we could riff on. But I think you've just opened a portal for me there. And that's one of the things I love about these conversations is you're sort of having one conversation over here and you open a sort of a side door and hopefully we'll be able to explore it in another conversation with a very diverse and different person.
Well, that's how we're very much, we won't go there, but just wanted to say, so part of our kind of idea of raising our kids is we're not doing kind of conventional schooling. I'm very much aware of that kind of that playful state of mind is when you kind of capitalize on what they're interested in. That's when you really absorb. Even as an adult, I know when I'm really into something, that's when I'll absorb all the information. But if you try to get me to learn that thing when I'm interested in this over here, it's not happening. And it's the same with kids, and it's probably it's just probably more extreme for them. So very much kind of aware of that, and it's something. I mean, people always said I'm just like a big kid, and I don't disagree. Someone said to me just the other weekend at this workshop I gave, and he was this performer, and we were talking, and I was telling him about the story with my granddad, and he just said to me, "You still see the magic, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I do. I don't. For me, I don't think I ever went too intellectual. I still was very much looking for the fun in everything." Too often to people's annoyance, you don't take it too serious, and I go, isn't that good?
I'm desperate to dig into your deep dive and glean some of that, but before we do, did you bring a sound with you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I did. There was a sound that I wanted to bring.
Yes.
And then there was a sound that I did bring.
Well,
and they're related.
Yeah, well, talk to us.
So I had the absolute privilege of setting up a compost bay, an active compost bay that was pretty much finished, but in the middle of Brighton Jubilee Library as part of an installation during a half term. And the idea was kids and their parents and whoever came into the library, but it was geared towards children, could come and interact with this thing, that you could touch it, you could smell it, probably could taste it. I shouldn't, but it's not going to hurt you. I checked with a microscope first. No pathogens in there. Bit of information about what I do, but not too much. And it was in and amongst lots of things that were going on in schools, community growing, that kind of theme. And then what we did on the last day, I went in with my microscope. And so I was there for the day. This was like everyone knew, so people were coming back. And I was kind of talking to the kids about these microbes. The fact that a teaspoon of this kind of compost has more microbes in it than humans on the planet, billions, right? And these kids, every time I was saying things, they look at their parents like mouth open, and the parents just go, I didn't look, kind of look at them like, but at the same time I can see they're going, I didn't know that.
Yes, son, I told you, know that.
Of course. And then I was saying, would you like to hear them? And so we had these mics in the compost pile for that day that we borrowed from the university, and it went through a unit that just whacks up the gain. And then they had a headphone splitter, so there was a few sets of headphones, we put them on, and you hear this kind of crunchy, crackling, rustling, and so they're listening, and I'm saying to them, there's all these little microbes in there, and I'm describing it to them. I've got this bacteria and the fungi, and they're mining nutrients from the aggregates, and then the protozoa and nematodes, they're like little alien blobs, and they start eating them, and they start what we call the poop loop, and then the kids love that. And so they start pooping out plant available nutrients, pop, 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 and then the nematode worms come along and they start eating them, and they're doing the same. So they're all, as I say, there's billions, and you're listening to them all, and it's like, and then once they got to that point, I'd say, do you want to see them? Come over with me. look on the microscope and flip open the laptop and it's got a camera on the top, so they're seeing it on the screen.
Right.
And so we find a nematode worm wriggling around. I say, look, he's eating all of that bacteria and he's just going to poop out nutrients for plants. So you don't ever need to use fertilizers. These plants can just be naturally pest and disease resistant. We don't need biocides. You don't need to dig the soil because they build structure. They're pulling particles together, creating space for water to be infiltrated and absorbed. And then there's kind of a capillary action, so they pull in oxygen beneath them and they just build structure deeper and deeper. And isn't that amazing? And it's like, the kids are just like, yeah. It's like I'm on the level with these kids.
Yeah.
The parents are just like, what's this guy's deal, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was just amazing.
Well,
that happened, and I had that sound.
Well, exactly. So I know you're going to go on and talk more about the sound, but I just have to ask you about, so if you're able to show them the stuff through vision, through camera, what is the value to you in your interactive experience with these kids in letting them hear stuff first? What is it about that you think is, and why does it go first?
I think that listening rather than seeing triggers the imagination, because a lot of people are thinking often people, when you're playing them some sound, will shut their eyes and they're thinking, they're visualizing. That's what I mean, everyone's different. I've got a friend who he can't do that. It's quite odd. We were just talking about it the other week, but a lot of people will be visualizing. And so I'm speaking to them, describing while they're listening to these sounds. And I'm talking alien blobs, pooping, quite tactile, quite visceral things. So hopefully their imagination's taking them, and then when I show them, you can potentially ask the question, is this what you thought?
Yeah.
I like that. I think that sound lends itself to imagination a bit more than maybe sight, almost maybe restricts the imagination a little.
Yeah. And I feel like maybe we, especially with screens, we are living in such a vision dominated society with computer screens, but also so much of our bandwidth does go to vision. And so maybe you're just getting hit with that the whole time. And maybe when you let them listen in, it's like that. There's a bit of an investigation. There's a bit of curiosity and imagination. As you say, there's gaps that they have to fill in. And maybe that, stitches into imagination, but also prepares the ground almost, so that when the picture comes into their brain, as you said, if you're into something, it goes in deep. If you're not into it, it's like hard to make you learn anything. I wonder if that sort of like prepares the ground so that when you give them the image, it lands deeper into their memory, into their system, so that because it's, I don't know, it's hard to explain.
No, I know what you mean.
You might have to speak to a developmental psychologist, but intuitively you kind of know it's got a different value to just showing the camera. Yeah.
Well, the sound, I think, is less distracting, and obviously you're audibly speaking to them.
Okay, yeah.
So you've got their attention. Their eyes are closed oftentimes and they're just listening already. Whereas when someone's looking at something, I mean, you see it with people with phones, that you can talk to them and they don't even hear you.
No, exactly.
So if I just showed them these things and start explaining in exactly the same way that I would when they're listening, I've done no scientific test here, but I wonder if it would go in as be absorbed as well.
I see what you mean. It's almost like, songs with lyrics and poetry to music and stuff. It's like
becomes more emotional.
Yeah, it elevates your words, but there's still room for your words, and actually potentially, more room to be heard more deeply, I guess. And so that is probably why it's been a pretty successful combination, words and music, for quite a long time.
Yeah.
You don't have that sound. You don't have the live compost sound for us, but
no.
What do you want us to hear?
I have a song.
Yeah.
Which is on the same kind of theme, but what I'd like to do is a little bit of a kind of, I mean, I may have already done it in what I've been talking about, but I would like to kind of just together, like just close our eyes, and I want to just kind of talk about what soil is for me.
Yeah.
To you.
Yes.
So that, because when I listen to this piece of music,
yes,
it's so subjective art. And so what soil is to me is magical. And so I want to try and impart a little bit of that onto you,
please, before
you listen to this.
Nice.
And I know you've heard this.
Okay. Well, I don't know what it is, but I think I can imagine what it might be now.
Yeah. So before we press go, I just wanted to I've kind of alluded to it when I was talking about like energies moving from one thing to another, right? So for me, soil, it's like the foundation of life on our planet. Like life happens from the ground up. And I'm often saying to people, what do we think of biodiversity as? And a lot of people think it's birds, bees, and butterflies. But over 50% of the known species to us now live in our soils. It's the most diverse and abundant and active ecosystem. And so to so many people, it's just dirt. It's just this brown powder or, brown sludge, depending on how wet it is. It was a little bit boggy out here today when we were walking around. But it's just life force. And everything cycles through the soil. Carbon, nutrients, minerals, everything. And we're carbon structures. I mean, often when I'm talking about the biology, I'm saying more of what makes up this me that's in front of you is non-human cells. We coexist, and we are nature, we are it's all one suchness. I love it kind of strips the ego a bit. I'm not even just me. If you were to sort of sterilize me and I'm just human, I'll perish because I coexist. So we all coexist. So
with the bacteria,
fungi, I mean everything, like things on us and in us. I mean plants kind of, I won't go right into it, but plants basically do externally around their roots, around their rhizosphere, what we do internally in our gut. And so the food that we eat should have this biology. I say should because sadly not enough does anymore. Should have this biology on and in it. It's not just protein and carbohydrate and these macro things, these nutrients. There should be the biology there that plants have co-evolved with, we've co-evolved with, that informs our biome, which underpins our immunity. 95% of serotonin is released in your gut, not your brain. So for me, soil is just everything. Everything has and or will cycle through the soil at some point. It's the interface between that which is the earth and the atmosphere. That active layer on the top is where it's all going on. It's where we're happening because of gravity, right? So everything happens in our soil. I love the idea that you don't create or destroy energy. So the carbon that is me right now, that I occupy right now, maybe it used to be a dinosaur's egg, and it's always been here, and it will all be here, always. It'll just be a different thing.
In technology, just quickly, when you're building web tech, we often talk about APIs, application programming interfaces, the simple rules that you can create to let other people talk to your database. And I'm almost imagining when you're speaking about that sort of all of the geology and biology that's under the ground in the earth, in the earth itself. As you say, this thin membrane of the ground, the topsoil, us, all the stuff that's going on, it is kind of that interface between the heavens and the earth. It's kind
just
of
where it all happens.
It's where it all happens, where life happens.
Yeah, I mean, I was at a frustrating talk not too long ago. Don't want to digress too much, but this guy was presenting, the parameters that the earth limits are in different respects, carbon and all these different things, and the ones where we're exceeding, obviously carbon being a big one, and others, and then talking about sort of mass agriculture. But then it kind of went on to talk about bioengineering and like CRISPR, which is this sort of gene editing rather than genetically modifying. You're just editing. It's like halfway. It's a gently in. And at the end was like, do you think this is the solution or part of the solution to get where we're at? And I just said, like, for me, you set the scene with all of these natural parameters, and then the classic human thing is we'll just invent a thing. And whenever we do that, we invent a solution to the one thing and we create 10 new problems. Is how I describe it. And then we fix those 10 things, we create 100 new problems, and we're just inventing our way into trouble further and further down the line. And I just said, like, there is nature's operating system. It's called soil. If we just farm in accordance with that and look after that. I mean, I say to growers, if you have a little bit of a paradigm shift, see yourself as a microbe farmer, building soil, healthy fruits and vegetables and animals, if you're farming them, pretty much grow themselves because there's a balance in nature. You know, the most abundant landscapes, no one goes in there to fertilize them.
I love that concept of microbe farmers. What would it be if that became your identity? But then my economic... Voila. But, you know, I think about economics a lot. I'm thinking about what are the incentives? What are we valuing? How do we buy and what do we sell? And I like to think about, once you give something a label and a bit of language, I like to think about how could you, even in small ways, you know, little grant programs, little, you know...
Of course, government subsidies already exist in farming. So
well, exactly. But to innovate on it, to start somewhere, it's like, how could you measure what good looks like as a microbe farmer in order that you could reward someone for it, even in a small way, just one person, to model something that might then build up to something that could be a subsidy that works at scale.
Yeah, well, I hope that's where we're getting to. I'm always, all the people that are kind of working in and around this field when we're talking, I kind of, you know, we're all quite excited. And I'm kind of saying, you know, we're all on the crest of a wave, but we've got to turn the tide of an ocean, you know, that's to come.
Let's hear what you want to play.
Yes. Okay.
I wanna go downwards. I wanna be ground. I wanna be fed on. I wanna break down. I wanna be all gone. I wanna be food. I wanna be walked on. I wanna be soil. I wanna be soil. I wanna be sound. I wanna hold secrets that will never be found. I wanna be soil. Live upside down. Well, it will never get lonely. With everyone round. I wanna go downwards. I wanna go downwards. I wanna be ground. I wanna be ground. I wanna be soil. I wanna be soil. I wanna be sound. Well, it will never be silent. And I will never be found. Never, never be a question. That's I wanna go down. That's I wanna be soil. That's I wanna be ground.
Soil. I like. There's a poet that I used to listen to a lot, and he used to say, this was a poem. The last thing on my list of things to do is try dying. If you want to live forever, then you will die trying. And that it brings that back for me, like this whole kind of we're gonna be soil, but this will all be here in another form. There's no. It reminds me very much of like. Well, I guess we kind of think of evolution as this kind of linear thing, but it's just this cycle. and it all happens through the soil.
I was it was really, really lovely to listen to it in this context with you and with everything you had prepared my mind for. I think two things that struck me. One, when I heard the bird song at the beginning, I thought it was here because we get lovely bird song here.
Yeah. I knew you'd pick up on that.
Yeah.
But I didn't know in what.
Well, no. So I thought it was. I thought it was the little birds up there, and you'll notice, you'll hear them. And they've been here with us the whole time. But then I heard it at the end of the track as well, and I was like, oh no, it was in the track. And so it was nice to have that feeling that the digital recording felt permeable, like it was melding with here.
Yeah.
But then also I liked it when he said, "We'll never be lonely," and I thought,
with everyone round.
With everyone round, and I thought that just jumped out at me really, because that is the thing that's beautiful in diverse environments, and it would be the same in diverse and healthy soil, but my experience being in the woods, it just feels so thick with connection and meaning, because I think from connection comes meaning, just being a part of it all.
Yeah, so that was by Cosmo Sheldrake. We have a Cosmo.
Nice.
And that actually came out, so I'm very much, so we have 2 children. We didn't name them until they were born, because I persisted with, how can you name someone you've never met?
Yeah.
And we tried, our little ones tried on different names for a day at a time. And not long before but Bella had fallen pregnant, she was in Bristol or Bath visiting a sister, and Cosmo Sheldrake was performing there. Right. And they just happened to go to the show, hear him play.
Oh, so it is actually linked.
Yeah. So that's where she heard the name.
Wow.
And because I don't think I'd heard that name before, not in the context of I heard like the cosmos.
Yeah.
And I know the flower cosmos, which our little Cosmo's that's his favourite flower. We sow them every year with him, and so it was just in her mind.
Ether, yeah.
Not even, it was, he tried on a few names, and it got to a point where I said, I'm quite enjoying Little Man. And then she just said, what about Cosmo? Yeah. And it fit.
Oh man, that's amazing. I had no idea. I mean, you mentioned earlier that your little one's called Cosmo, but I didn't realise there was actually a connection. Yeah. So we've danced around it, we've talked about it, but take us into this deep dive then, and I'm gonna might quick fire you a bit and try and really interrogate this, because I want to get as deep as we can into it, and I might ask you some, to clarify what you mean by things if they sound new to me. But you were digging around in your market garden, and then you weren't satiated, as you said. And what was the learning journey? Take us step by step. What was your attention being drawn to?
So I very much think of it as like an intuition, just telling me there's got to be more to this. Okay. And basically studied what is called the soil food web. Yeah. And there's a lady called Dr. Elaine Ingham, who's like a kind of leading soil biologist, who's created this online learning platform called the Soil Food Web School. It was very long, it was a deep dive. You learn about soil biology and all these microbes to the point where you can look through a microscope and you understand the morphology. You can see a microscopic nematode worm, zoom in 400 times, 1,000 times magnification, look at its mouth parts, and be able to determine whether it eats bacteria, fungi, other protozoa, which are other soil organisms, or if it's predatory, where it might eat each other, which is cool, or root feeding, which would be bad.
So you went from doing some gardening to going on this course, learning all this stuff, getting your mind blown. Yeah. And what did it leave you with at the end of that course then? What door had it unlocked?
We were doing it, they're like hour-long lectures, and there's a lot of them, and we were doing like one a week, so it was over a long period. So the idea for doing Compost Club, which is what I do, food waste collections and making compost with it, I was doing that, and this was kind of underscoring that and bringing much more to the table with different things. So there's chemistry, there's just as deep an understanding of the soil as we have right now. But even now that we're kind of discovering things and figuring them out, but it leads on to finding a whole load of new things that we don't yet understand.
So So what did you fundamentally learn about the soil? So obviously it's called the food web. What is the revelation that somebody needs to know if they've never thought about soil?
Yeah,
they've heard that song.
Takeaways, yeah.
They're connected, and now what is the thing that somebody should know about soil?
So key things for me were things like the fact that in sand, silt, clay, and organic matter will be all the nutrients that your plants need to not just survive, but to fully express and be absolutely abundant.
So sand, silt, and
clay particles. Yeah,
so
sand being the biggest, clay being the smallest.
And that represents what? All different kinds of land?
Those are the kind of geological mineral inputs. Those are the actual aggregates that you've got, and you'll be somewhere on that spectrum.
Anywhere in the world, any part of the earth around the world.
Land. Yeah. So obviously a desert is lots of sand. Here we're lots of clay.
Yes. Lots of clay.
Yeah. So
but some mixture of those three, or is what land is.
Is geologically what land is. What I learned is that soil is much more than that. So what Elaine would say is there's a discernible difference between soil and dirt.
Okay.
So dirt is just sand, silt, and clay. And what happens when you just have that? When the wind blows, it blows away. And when the rain falls hard, it washes away. And you see it when you go past over-tilled farms and things. You see, drive down a country lane and the roads, the colour of clay is washing. You're seeing topsoil. That is topsoil erosion. That's what's happening in the world. We're losing a lot of soil. It's a problem. What biology does is it produces... bacteria basically produce a carbon-based alkaline glue. And as I say, I'll start at the beginning. So all the nutrients are in the sand, silt, and clay.
Yes.
But plants can't access it. It's locked up in tiny crystalline structures. So that's why people will put fertilizers down for their plants. If you have bacteria, and this is a mind blower. So I learned about how plants work at school, right, and at college. They photosynthesize. They take energy from the sun. They take in carbon dioxide. They release oxygen. And the roots, what do the roots do?
Well, I mean, I probably haven't got the right answer for you.
No, I want that answer. I could just tell you.
What the roots do? I mean, the roots are stabilizing the plant. They're growing. They're, I don't know, they taking water in. They're, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah,
those things, and absorbing nutrients as well from the soil.
Yeah.
And that was the end of the lesson.
Yeah.
Plants, I think of it, it wasn't described as this on the course, but I think of it as this amazing plant intelligence, right? Depending on where a plant is in succession meaning starting from lichen and moss up to weeds, grass, shrubs, old growth forest, that's natural succession. Depending on where they are in there, up to 40% of all of their energy, they release it out of their roots, pumping it into the soil.
I see.
And they're doing that to feed and attract microbiology, to create, like I said earlier, that rhizosphere around their root. So that biome, like we have internally.
Yes.
As plants evolve, they do that externally.
Creating a stomach almost on the outside of their structure.
Yeah, and the way that happens is biology, a bacteria and fungi mine the nutrients from sand, silt, clay, and organic matter. And they create structure. And then things start eating things. The next sort of trophic level is protozoa, nematodes, and they start eating bacteria and fungi, pooping out plant-available nutrients. And then what happens is it creates this dense structure, this dense system, so that then soil-borne pathogens will be outcompeted and or consumed and metabolized into plant food. You could have things like traces of like residual glyphosate, and this biology will metabolize it from something toxic into plant food. It's amazing.
So essentially, I think what you're describing there is the primary realization was getting on for half of all the action and interaction and clever stuff that the plant engages with the environment in is all under the soil. And it's easy just to think it's just stuck and just like that.
Well, and it's not just taking, it's giving. And my thinking, I mean, when I talk to people now, I'm sort of saying, they can't move. So they invest in their environment. Maybe we would be better putting down roots and investing in our environment.
Yeah.
Because we just mess up a place and move on. It's a problem, actually. We should stop doing that. We should be more like plant. We should learn from the plants. And then there's other more complex ways. There's this. There's this thing called rhizophagy. It's like root eating, and there's a type of bacteria that goes into the root, into the tip of the root. It's attracted by these. They release it, the stuff they release. We call it exudates. They exude, and it attracts biology. Sometimes it goes in. The plant attracts it. It detects it, sends this superoxide, and starts to assimilate nitrogen from within inside of itself.
Okay, that sounds like an alien life form.
It's mad. And that just highlights how erroneous, like, the kind of conventional agronomists will measure your soluble nitrogen and then tell you need to apply more. But they're not checking, do you have this bacteria that is just working with the plant to produce nitrogen. So
firstly, there's a huge amount of interaction that's happening under the soil, and it's giving and it's taking, and it's alive and it's active and it's
alive is the key thing. It's the biology. The soil is a living ecosystem, and we don't see it, we don't hear it, which is why I like to make that a thing. And we have names like dirt and muck and mud, and it's beneath us, and we look up and that's all shiny. It's all these things. It's a big neglected area.
But then the second part is you're saying that within that structure, within that silt, sand and clay, is all the nutrients that we need. So there is an abundance of stuff for plants, but it's just trying to create that gateway for the plants to be able to access it. And so tell us more about that gateway then.
So there's three kind of main ways. So there's a thing, as I say, the soil food web is that, as I say, things eating things, pooping out nutrients. That's the most easy way to explain it. But then there's also the rhizophagy, which is the bacteria going into the plant, and then it starts assimilating nutrients inside of itself. The other one, the other most commonly spoken about one, is what we call cation exchange capacity. Might be a bit heavy science, but it's more chemistry. So as particularly in clay, like clay is the smallest particles, and so it compacts. That's why it goes like that. You get sitting water. When you break it up and you get organic matter in it and you get biology into it, they start building more structure, and they call it flocculation. The clay opens up. Clay will hold more minerals and nutrients than sand, because it's all kind of locked up in there. So you can free them up, and so it's potentially the best.
Creating space in the soil, helps with the interactions.
That you get the free movement of these cations. So then they essentially, what happens is they're charged. You've got positive and negative charges. So they start moving around, bumbling around, and elements and minerals and nutrients adhere to them because they attract them, and then they're attracted to the plant roots, which are the opposite charge, and they exchange. So it's another way of nutrient exchange. This is the cation exchange. So the soil will have a cation exchange capacity, and then you can make that more and more functional. And clay basically has the best kind of potential. So I love compacted clay because if we turn that around, way to go.
We've got plenty of that here.
Yeah, exactly.
That's exciting.
So you have potentially the best soil.
If you can open it up and get that cation
get a broad
exchange.
Fork, get plenty of organic matter and get biology in. And you might broad fork for maybe 2 or 3 years as part of your bed prep. Broad forking is just putting a...
Well, that's what Jack's got out there right now. Yeah,
perfect.
His dad made one.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, so you don't plough until... Because that opens up the soil, but it chops up all the fungi, and so it will quickly compact again, and you create a compaction layer at the depth that you till to, which is over time what's happened. Ploughs have been getting deeper and deeper.
I used a metaphor with Jack, which he enjoyed, which was to say, so we're looking for cake rather than fudge brownie.
Yeah.
That you're not looking to sort of crumble it down and disassemble it altogether, but just looking for a bit of space.
Yeah.
So
and then the biology turns it into the crumble.
I see.
That's what happens over time. So you use the broad fork as part of your bed prep for a few years, and then you get the biology in all the time. Then you don't need to do that anymore because you've done. I think of it. I call the broad fork like a soil chiropractic. You get it in line like this, bit of brute force, and then you just put in good practice. Yoga. We'll use yoga to mean microbes in this instance, and organic matter, and then the soil food web takes over, and you can just relax, and you can create a seed bed on the surface, and you can sow your seeds, and it just all happens for you.
So what are the key? So I want to go slightly practical summaries, just in case anybody's interested in the soil, and then I want to circle back to the sort of the deeper nuances, let's say.
Yeah.
But if somebody wants to unlock their soil, stop it being dirt, increase the biology, unlock the value that lies within it, sounds like there's some creating some air, creating some space, and to allow all that clever stuff to happen that you mentioned. Is there a couple of other things that are like wins for nurturing and giving your soil some love?
I mean, essentially, it is that. So the difference between like a dirt and a soil. So a soil is, as you say, you need air. It's kind of like, it's almost like I describe it like a compost pile is like a baby. Microbes need moisture. They don't want it too wet. They don't want it too dry. They're a little bit fussy. They need to breathe, so you need oxygen. Elaine Ingham describes it as good guys and bad guys. I don't really like that. But essentially, if you go anaerobic and you've got no oxygen, the type of biology will potentially be pathogenic. That's when you'll get root feeding nematodes, for example. As long as you keep the right conditions and you keep oxygen and moisture and plenty of organic matter, you create the conditions for beneficials. And beneficials, like nature has a balance. Beneficials will always compete the bad guys. So it's just about, rather than, I always say to people like who manage a piece of land, rather than sort of looking at it, this is my land, I'm going to exert my will and dominate this space. You read the land. It's kind of permaculture. You read the land, you see what it's telling you. You know, I mean, even like weeds, they're like bioindicators. So, for example, dandelions indicates low available calcium. There's no calcium in your soil. It's just not available for whatever reason. And there's a whole spreadsheet of different bioindicator weeds. So you can read the land. And it's then working with that land in an appropriate way and just creating the conditions. So you're stewarding and facilitating the full expression of that soil, rather than just going, I want this there and that there, and just making that happen.
Well, to me, that is listening to the land.
Exactly.
You know, bioindicators,
to
me, is saying I am using my eyes and my ears, probably my eyes more in this case, but using my eyes to observe, to listen, to take in what the land is telling me, not just to blindly roll in with a bulldozer and say I'm going to do all this stuff.
Well, and take a sample of soil. Worm counts are good. To put a sample under the microscope. What biology do you have? How do we want to change that? You know, I mean, a big important thing, one of the mind-blowing things I learned is that the fungal to bacterial ratio in your soil, really important. As you go from annual weeds at the beginning of succession, highly bacterial dominant. Old growth forest, massively fungal dominant. Traditional row crops, wheats, they want 1-to-1. They want a nice balance. Most kind of annual vegetables want about 0.75 to 1 fungal to bacterial. Most commercial compost will have very little, if any, fungi in it. A lot of, like, if you till your soil, I mean, basically fungi is very delicate. So if you run a plow across a field, you chop up all the mycelium and it kind of can die back. And you leave the bacteria, which is like 1 micron, is tiny. So the condition,
messing up your balances.
You have a dysbiosis like we get in our gut.
Dysbiosis.
An imbalance in the force, right? To use a Star Wars term. And so the fungal to bacterial ratio, the amount of fungi in your soil, will select for or against weeds. I thought as a grower, weeds are super prevalent, they're brilliant, they'll grow. And the better my soil is, the more my weed burden, because then they can really go for it. But actually I've learned through the soil food web, it's the opposite. The more fungi I can get into my soil, the more I look after my soil, the less likely the weeds. So they call it like quorum sensing. So there's this sensing going on. So if you go in an old growth forest,
quorum sensing. Yeah,
and so it's basically like chemical signaling going on. And then when that is met, that signaling, they call it quorum quenching. It'll stop signaling for that. So in an old growth forest, you won't be seeing all these.
What's an old growth forest?
Old growth forest would be like just really well established forest that's been there a long time, undisturbed. Woodland. So there'll be loads of fungi. You won't have all those annual weeds all over the place because there's so much fungi. It's not,
and we're
the
talking
conditions.
stingy nettles and big sprawling leaves,
like the dandelions and the docks and all. There'll be some of that stuff, but it's usually around the edges rather than in the thick of it. And so what will happen is if you were to, it's not that the seeds don't go in,
Yes.
but the conditions aren't right. They're dormant. And so if you cut down all that forest and you ploughed up that field, the sun would shine, the rain would fall, and that little dandelion seed that's landed will go, now!
Yeah.
Because you've got a bacterial dominant soil, and they're basically like nature's pioneering plants. They grow when nothing else does. They're the beginning of succession. So if there were like a catastrophic event, say a volcano erupted, and it was all ancient woodland, it starts at the beginning. It's rock. And so you need lichen to start mining those, and then moss, and then they die back, and you start to get the beginnings of compost and soil, and then the weeds grow, and then it starts to get more and more fungi as it works its way back up to old growth forest again.
I see.
And then it erupts, and then it starts again. And it's just...
So here we put a lot of wood chip down in between the beds.
Yeah, lovely.
And I've seen a load of mushrooms growing in the wood chip. I guess it's come from the forest.
You're bringing in indigenous microbes. It's beautiful.
Yes,
So you're bringing in fungal... I mean, we're breathing fungal spores right now.
Right.
It's everywhere.
All right.
Microbes are everywhere. It's quite funny. I hadn't thought about this. Someone said to me, the time that you started doing this compost club thing, the whole world was obsessing over sterilizing everything.
Yeah.
And you were out there going, I want to maximize biological abundance and diversity.
Yeah.
I don't know what that says about my character. It wasn't a conscious thing.
No,
It was
natural
just,
response.
Yeah, it was like, this isn't right. Like, I mean, I've got a friend who has a theory that, fungi is farming us actually, which is quite funny. But I mean, this blew my mind. This is new. I read on social media a post that said, and it named it, and I never remember the name, but the type of microbe in the soil that they call as like a natural antidepressant.
Okay.
And it said it stimulates the release of serotonin in your brain. And knowing that most serotonin is produced in your gut, I basically went into like fact checker mode and did one of my deep dives and went into it. And because I thought, if that's wrong, I should tell them. They weren't wrong. It does, you absorb it through touch, through your skin. You don't breathe it or inhale it or anything. Wow. And it does trigger a release of serotonin into your prefrontal cortex. And that is where and in this thing that I was reading, so that's where the kind of centers for anxiety and things are. And in that moment, I had this mad realization, because often when I'm kind of telling my story through all of this, and being someone that like we met a long time ago, you might even recognize this as a thing. I used to have like crippling social anxiety, and I used to be very quiet and very shy, particularly around new people. I couldn't even telephone for a takeaway for a long time because I wouldn't know who'd be answering the phone. And that kind of eased a bit, and I started doing stuff with bands and music, and basically like it was almost like exposure therapy. Like I had to talk to people, but I didn't like it. I came out of lockdown with this thing I was doing, and one of the first things that happened is someone asked me to be on a panel on a live podcast, and I just said yes. And then when I was there in front of all these people, I went to pick up a kombucha that they'd given me, and my hand was going like this, and I put my other hand on, and I can remember going, I hope no one saw that, like in my head. But as soon as I started speaking, I relaxed into my chair and felt like I was with a load of old friends, and developed this kind of like I want to be sharing this stuff now, and you can't shut me up, and I can just talk to strangers now. And I thought, and a lot of people when I've told that story say, oh, you found your thing, good for you, you found your thing. But actually I've just figured out like 3 days ago that maybe what's happened is because I'm in soil and compost, and I very rarely wear gloves because I love the stuff, every day. I go to site almost every day. Potentially I've rewired this prefrontal cortex, and anxiety isn't there anymore.
Because it's coming through the touch sense.
Yeah, I'm absorbing it. Like,
See, that's
kind
amazing.
of blown my mind a bit.
Yeah, because that's one of the things I'm excited about with this podcast. Is part of it is using listening as a way into thinking about all the different senses, and that's quite powerful. Thinking about touch and what's the chemicals coming in, and obviously it's scary when you think about plastics and that kind of side as well, which I don't know enough about to speak about.
Dyes in clothing, deodorants, perfumes.
And every time I walk in the woods, and this might just might have nothing to do with chemicals coming absorbing through my skin, but I always get a little stick and just break it up into little pieces and just hold them like marbles in my hand. And no matter how long we're walking for, I always find at the end of a walk, somehow, without realising, I've got this handful
It's kind of ground up.
Yeah, just into little pellets almost. Sort of.
I do it with my thumb. I break little bits.
Yeah, exactly.
As I'm going,
and then I just kind of hold them and you think, why is that? Maybe it's a physical thing, but maybe there's also breaking it up. There's some stuff that's in the woodland that maybe I want in my skin, and maybe it makes a difference.
And what does it smell like when you're in the woods doing that?
I can't tell you. I tell you, my sense of smell is growing, shall we say, because my wife is tuning me into it. And obviously one part is, do you pay attention to it? And the other is, do you have the actual sensors, to be able to do it? And I think I've got limited sensors, but I am tuning into them more now because it's of benefit to me, because my wife likes it when I take the bins out if they smell. So I'll bear that in mind, and I'll think about that next time.
The reason I ask, there's like a group of compounds in the soil. Some of it's like a bacteria called actinomycetes, or mycetes. People say it differently. And particularly when it rains, you get that sweet, you know what I mean? Yeah, that smell, sweet. Yeah, so that is these compounds. The rain disturbs it, they rise, and you smell it. And sometimes I used to work with a guy who would say, like, we'd be up on a scaffold on a building site, and he'd go, smells like it's going to rain. And I used to think he was insane.
Yeah.
I found out about this thing. They call this group of these compounds geosmin.
Geosmin.
And we can detect it. Not everybody exactly the same.
Yeah, my wife probably can.
Yeah. Just generally, as low as 5 parts per trillion.
Holy moly.
1 drop in an Olympic swimming pool, we can detect that smell. So he was like lightning before the sound. He could probably smell the rain that was, because it always would rain after he said it.
Wow.
Like maybe 10 minutes later or something. And
1 part in a trillion.
No, that's 5 parts per trillion.
5 parts per trillion.
Yeah. But it's like 1 drop in an Olympic swimming pool. We're more attuned than like a shark is to blood in water. Not that they're attracted to human blood, but like, fish blood or something.
Where did you learn this?
It was in a talk that someone, like a soil expert, was giving.
Yes.
And then because I am how I am, and I've already said, I go away and, is that right?
Yeah.
And that's where I learned about the drop in a swimming pool thing.
Wow.
It's actually true.
Wow.
And no one really knows why. And my theory is, reading the book Sapiens.
Yeah.
I loved that book years ago. If we evolved nomadically, we had to find food. Where's the fertile land? Where's the food? That's my thinking. We followed our noses.
Yeah, and I wonder to what extent, as we went from, hunter-gatherer foragers through to farmers, essentially, to what extent that changes the dominance of our senses. What becomes more valuable than others.
Well, it's like like muscles. It's like you use it and you strengthen it. You don't use it, and even things like epigenetics. You can change by having your focus elsewhere. I mean, we talked about like imagination and things earlier. I mean, for me, like I remember having this what felt like a revelation because I was quite like sheltered growing up. Like I lived within walls. And I remember listening to a snippet of Steve Jobs saying, people tell you your life is this thing and your job is to exist within that. Don't bash into the walls, don't make too much noise, don't make a mess. But some people push against that and they test it and interesting things pop out. And then when you do that, you realize you can mold things and life doesn't have to be this thing. And I can remember the realization. I remember sitting talking to my aunt and uncle and saying, I've realized that the difference between me and somebody that I perceive doing something really cool is just the fact that they're doing it.
Yeah.
And I felt like life became limitless. And I now, like the like your reality is only confined by your imagination. You just decide. Like I just decided one day, I want to make a form of activism my work and do that. And then I just did it. I used to live in a world where that thought wouldn't have even occurred to me.
Yes. And
so it was just through, I mean, it was a long process. Like we got rid of our TV and we lived in a van and I just started reading.
Yeah.
And done that for years. And discovered people like Alan Watts and Krishnamurti and started going to like hear people speak and just my just became somebody else, I think.
Well, you're changing your inputs, aren't you? You're changing your what you're listening to, what you're seeing, what you're digesting, and that ends up inevitably is going to create a different or an evolve the person that's in front of you.
It's very cool to have that, like to know that that's possible.
Yes. No, it's amazing to see the difference even in the last few years that I've known you. You know, how you're continuing to evolve into this like real expert now in deep dive on soil, and everyone knows it, you know.
I don't like to call myself an
BBC.
expert, but yeah, well, people say it. I don't say it, but people say it.
So I'll ask you one more question and then see if there's anything else you want to throw in before we wind up. And I guess this, you know, again, the podcast Listening With, I realize that within listening, there's lots of different questions you can ask. Why do we listen? How do we listen? What are we listening to? When are we listening? You know, and I think different people with different experiences come at things from different angles. And it seems to me that this conversation is about how do you listen to the soil? And I guess, well, I think we've probably talked about it, but I just want to ask you that question directly. Like, how do you listen to the soil? What tools have you developed to listen to the soil? And do you even relate to that as a question?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's the literal sense where you could put microphones into it, but
Does that reveal anything to you? Like, I know it was fun to interact with and build the curiosity and imagination for the kids, but is there anything you can observe? So underwater, there's lots we can observe through acoustics that we can't observe very easily through visuals or cameras. But is there anything? Possibly.
I mean, I just did it that one time.
I see.
In a really like it would. What would probably be revealed if you did it in certain soils with certain known species. Like I know that I've heard like the sound of a worm crawling through a soil, or the sound of different animals moving over the soil and stuff. So there would be those things, but with mine it was just crackling and madness because it was a big pile, and as I say, there's a lot of microbes just having a party.
Well, just quickly on that, there is another way. I mean, one thing is looking at species identification, but the other thing is looking at sonic abundance. So
I mean, yeah, maybe that, because I'm sure if I've just done it that one time, you see, so I'm sure if I did that, I'd love, because I do comparisons with my compost and like commercial compost, and one of my slides that talks is like, look at this, we make 2 million tons of this, isn't it rubbish? So I could put these same mics if I got them. I might see if I can just buy them. And just put them in other things.
Let's do it here. I'd love to do that next time I see you. Let's get 2 different piles, your stuff that we know's full of life.
I brought you a bag today.
Oh, have you?
Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, thank you. It's long overdue. I think that's a very kind
of. It's a little bag.
Yeah. Well, it's a starter bag.
Yeah, it's a taster.
Exactly. Like any good drug dealer. We should do that. We should do it here. I'd love to do that here.
Yeah, man.
Get 2 piles, because we do it with degraded reefs and healthy reefs. And actually, interestingly, in those environments, if you use sonic enrichment and you actually play the sound of a healthy reef in a degraded reef, it can actually help the settlement of coral larvae and accelerate the growth of a degraded reef by up to 7 times.
Yeah, so like would the sound of a healthy functioning soil stimulate the attraction of the microbes?
Well, that's the question.
To cultivate, to colonize. And
it's possible, as in I'm not being specific about the possibility here. It seems possible because these coral larvae have no brains. They're very simple organisms. And speaking with Josh and Steve Simpson, they were telling me that they basically respond to frequencies from 600 to 800 hertz. And the little hairs on the outside of their little structures notice the 600 to 800 frequencies and move towards them. So very simple attraction, but I would imagine there's similar kind of organisms that you're describing, these little things with teeth and whatever, that might have the ability to receive simple frequency. So it would be first very interesting to know if there was a sonic difference between the full of life biology filled soil you're describing and the stuff that's close to geology, dirt. Let's do that first. And if there's a difference there,
Then start to play.
then we can play with what happens to it if you change the frequencies bubbling around in there.
Well, we think of sound as being very different from touch, which it is to us as we detect it. But if you're small enough, sound is a vibration, right?
Yeah.
So how do you detect that if you don't have these ears?
Exactly.
You feel it.
Yeah.
Who knows? That's really cool. I like that.
Oh, I'd love to play with that some more.
Yeah, man.
So yeah, next time we'll get the mics in there.
We'll bring the microscope up.
But is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything you got coming up? Any topics around soil or listening that you'd love to touch on?
I've got I'm going to be doing more talks and workshops and things like that. Doing a couple of festivals, talks at those. But they'll all be on my website. People rather than just people can just find that.
And what's the website?
It's just compostclub.online.
And everything about you is on there.
Yeah, there's
You're
a bit
active.
called about me. I'm mostly active on Instagram.
Yeah.
Most stuff. It's actually probably better than my website.
And what's your Instagram?
It's just there's two. It's just compost.club or compost.michael.
Yeah.
And
nice.
then you can find me there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And if someone's going to take away one simple thing from everything that we've touched on today, what might Michael's final thought be?
A very constant thought for me is this. It is the way the world actually is an enormously complex, interrelated organism. So what I mean by that is nothing exists in isolation. Not you or I, not this table, not the soil, not the plants, not the air we breathe. Everything is interrelated. And so everything you do impacts something, whether you're conscious of it or not. And so maybe I'll just leave that there. Take away from that what you like.
Yeah.
Or not.
No, I love it. Thank you so much for making time. Hopefully this is the first of many conversations that we can share with others. And let's get those sound samples going on in the soil. I'm excited by that.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, mate.
Pleasure.
The human foot is an evolutionary masterpiece. 26 bones for natural stability, over 100 muscles, tendons and ligaments for natural strength. Hundreds of thousands of nerve endings for natural sensory feeling. Just by wearing bare footwear for 6 months, feet regain their shape, sense and strength by 60%. Embrace your human nature and get 15% off your first Vivo Barefoot order with this link.